All right. Can you hear us?
Check.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Test yours.
Check. Great. So good to see you all. So many people here in Seattle.
So Vijay and I were trying to figure out who should interview who, and we landed on let's do some of both. So we're trying a new format this time. This is despite the fact that we've done 4 or 5 things together in San Francisco, and we both live in Seattle. This is the first time we've ever done something together in Seattle, so finally.
I know, Ben said, like, this is going to be a shortest commute for us to meet together on a stage. So it's pretty awesome.
So I co-host the Acquired podcast. It's the #1 tech and business podcast. Thank you. I was going to try to set context for anybody who didn't know. Thank you for the feedback. Sounds like some folks know. Vijay is the founder and CEO of Statsig, one of the most exciting companies in Seattle and the whole, software and AI space today.
Thanks. For those who don't know, Ben had a history of starting companies here in Seattle, starting VC firms, and also working in small and large companies before he went off to do the Acquired podcast. So highly relevant here. Lots of good experience you can gather from.
All right, so Vijay, time doing stuff at Microsoft, time inventing Facebook's core business model, or the technology behind Facebook's core business model, going from engineer to executive. So you've done some really interesting stuff at bigger companies, but then you started Statsig, your first startup, right?
This is my first startup, yes.
So I'm curious, watching on LinkedIn and Twitter, we got sort of the nice view of Statsig. What are some of the crazier stories that you haven't shared publicly about starting a Seattle startup?
Yeah, so the craziest story is we started in the middle of the pandemic. So February 2021, you all remember, right? So we were all, every company out there was doing remote stuff. So people who were in person used to go remote, and then people that were starting new companies were all remote. At that time, we decided something very controversial, which is we got everyone into an office, about 8 of us, and we put these large industrial HEPA purifiers. So one of our engineers calculated the cubic feet of our office and then calculated what the CDC recommends for the air circulation. So we actually went and did all of that just so we can stay in person. And that turned out great because we also got to play some LAN parties, Dota 2 at that time, and then League of Legends later. So kind of you can imagine the vibe, the energy that we started off with. A lot of people used to ask, okay, well, how long is this going to last? And I said, I have no idea how long this is going to last. We probably have to go remote at some point. 4 years in, we're in Bellevue, in person, 5 days a week. So I think that was one of the craziest stories.
I remember watching GeekWire's funding announcements in that era, and every single time it's like a screenshot of a Zoom image, and yours was a selfie where you're all wearing masks, standing in the same big empty office together.
Yeah, those were fun days. We were right next to Burger Master, so we would go to Burger Master for lunch.
So now you are a very fast-growing company, and clearly kind of this interesting breakout story. Was it that way early on, or were you wandering for a while before you sort of found product market fit?
Yeah, early on, one of the big inflection moments was finding the ICP. So we were building in vacuum. So about for a year or so, we thought we knew what we were going to go build. And after building it, we were looking for design partners. And so we were literally giving our product out for free and asking people to try and use it so they can give us feedback. And that was actually one of our lowest moments too, because we couldn't find anyone that would want to use our product. And until we started seeing some usage come from an ex-Facebook engineer who was building a startup in Singapore. And we started seeing that, and we started talking to that person, and that was kind of like a moment where we realized that what we were trying to sell was not a painkiller. It was more of a vitamin. Unless you know exactly what the value of the product is, you won't understand intuitively. And you wouldn't, first of all, to try and use the product, and then secondly, to pay for it. Once we understood that the audience that we need to go after was the people that already used similar tools, we went after ex-Facebook people. And so that was a pretty large eye-opening moment for us. It was the identification of who our ICP was.
And for folks that don't know, the original Statsig product was effectively a set of tools that you had used inside Facebook, and you thought this really should exist for all startups more broadly. But unless you had actually existed in that environment, you couldn't have known how good it was to have that.
Yeah, precisely. So the inspiration for Statsig came from all of the data tools that we had access to inside a fast-growing company in the 2010s, Facebook. And so in order to actually fully internalize the value of like what Statsig brought at that time, you should have like actually tried one of these things, and then you wouldn't live without it. And so that's why I call it the vitamin problem.
So if I was sitting in a meeting with you and you said, okay, I think what we have to do is go only after ex-Facebook people building startups, the correct skeptical response is, yeah, but how big is that market? You have scaled way beyond that market, so how did you transcend only former Facebook engineers as a TAM into the broader landscape?
Yeah, so the initial ICP is not always your final ICP. So for us, the starting point was the initial ICP, which was like the ex-Facebook engineers and the ex-Facebook execs who use the product. But beyond that, one of the good things is like, you stop building in vacuum at that stage, and then you take feedback from people that are using your product, so, which is extremely valuable. So one of the things that I always believe in, like the faster you can get out of a vacuum and build based on feedback, you will build a product that people want. You will build something that people would want to pay money for. And so that's kind of like how we grew after the first set of customers, and then we kind of like expanded our audience to much more than like ex-Facebook folks.
And for folks who may not understand the scale of the company today, what are some numbers you can share, maybe head count or customer count, or even drifting closer to the revenue type numbers, if you're willing?
Thanks. Let's see. We have about 110 to 115 people, give or take. We're hiring very rapidly at this point. So that's most of them are in Bellevue. We're all in person. And then there's a small set of sales folks that are in various areas in the US and a couple folks in London. So that's one stat. And then we have a lot of startups that are using our products, so in the thousands. And we have some hundreds of Fortune 500 companies that are using our products, which is a great stat that I want to share here.
Hundreds of Fortune 500?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah. And then let's see, we have, you know what? One stat that I want to go and pull is like how many Seattle companies are using our products. I want to go pull that up today.
All right, so Seattle, how has building specifically in Seattle been an advantage for you?
Seattle is fantastic, and obviously one of the things that I strongly believe is like, look at this talent. This is amazing. Seattle's got, it's kind of like this quiet talent that has such good experience building at scale for large companies who are also highly motivated to like go build some really, really cool things from scratch. And I think that's kind of like underappreciated or under-noticed, which is kind of good for us because we're constantly hiring, and I think that the Seattle talent is really, really good. I also want to comment on the weather. I mean, like, look at this Seattle rainy day on a Friday, and everybody's here. You're not out there on the beach in the sun playing volleyball.
It's a great day to be productive.
Perfect for startups. But, okay, well, I want to switch this around. I want to ask Ben a few questions, and then we can keep this going. Sound good?
Perfect.
All right, Ben, you have interviewed dozens, maybe even hundreds of people that have built startups, that have built large companies, legendary companies. What common thread do you see when it comes to successful people building great, successful startups?
So on Acquired, we tend to study outliers. Trillion-dollar companies. I mean, there's what, 7 or 8 in the world, and these multi-hundred-billion-dollar market caps. And so our study ends up, if you follow it back to the causes, is what causes you to be an extreme outlier or an N of 1 company. And in many cases, or in almost all cases, it's tautological. Every single one is unique. Otherwise, it couldn't be an N of 1 company. And so there's these traits of founders where I would say every single founder of a TSMC or a Rolex or an Hermes or a Costco is extreme in some way, but they're all extreme in different ways. And I think it's about aligning the way in which you are extreme with a skill set to build a particular product for which there is a market and the right culture to run a company like that. But Warren Buffett would not thrive running Apple, and Tim Cook would not thrive even running Google. Like, it's too different of a chasm between those companies. And so my best advice is figure out the way you're extreme and then figure out how to turn that into something.
Okay, now bringing it back to Seattle, what do you think is Seattle's biggest competitive advantage over, like, say, San Francisco or the Valley? You have such broad line of sight.
Seattle's weird, right? We have 2 of the 4 largest companies in the world. I mean, this is very strange that almost all trillion-dollar companies in the world, other than Berkshire Hathaway and TSMC, are located on the west coast of the United States. Like, that's odd, right? We're doing something right on this one coast of this one country to innovate, create huge innovation at scale. And so then you've got these 2 cities where Microsoft and Amazon are up here, and Google and Facebook and Apple and now OpenAI and all these other are down there. But up here, despite the fact that this room looks large, there's still like 1/100th the number of companies as the Bay Area, and maybe 1/100th the local capital. And so then the question is, how do you exploit that mismatch where you have literally hundreds of thousands of engineers, but 1/100th the number of startups? It kind of seems like, A, more of this feels like a big opportunity, but B, this celebration of leaving to start a startup, sort of no matter how it goes, and starting to look down at, it's my year 10 anniversary at Microsoft, not as something worthy of applause, but of, well, when are you going to do something interesting?
Okay, so is there a specific Seattle company that is exciting, that's coming up or emerging in the startup scene for you?
Is it too cheeky if I say Statsig? I mean, truly, like, when someone else asked me this question 2 days ago, we were having coffee, and I was like, I got to introduce you to Vijay. So, like, truthfully, it's Statsig, but I don't want to. Let's move on, because that's an embarrassing answer. Or it's like it feels planted or something.
All right. We did not plant that. But so now you've worked with early startups and founders, and you've been an investor for 9+ years, and before you went full-time on Acquired. If you had a time machine and you went back, based on what you've already learned now, what would you tell yourself?
So Acquired is this very strange beast that has doubled our audience every year this is our 10th year. And doubling is not interesting when you go from 500 listeners to 1,000 listeners, because you think, okay, I'm still doing something that is very clearly a side project and inconsequential in the world. And even 1,000 to 2,000, 2,000 to 4,000, when you're subscale, 100% growth just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. But compounding happens fast. And so last year when we grew from 500,000 listeners to 1 million listeners, that we went through some magical threshold where suddenly newspapers are writing articles that some new breakout podcast happened. I'm like, it's been 9.5 years. This is not new. This is not overnight. But you need to, any curve that compounds looks like this. And you just need to make it through that years and years of irrelevance, even though the growth rate is high. In the world, you're irrelevant. And I think there's this huge amount of, if you're doing something that customers like, you kind of need to just exist long enough for the world to say, oh, they're trustworthy. The Lindy effect needs to kick in. The idea that if something has existed for a long time, humans tend to predict it will exist for a long time. So customers take dependencies on you, and people join your company because they've heard of it. And partnerships emerge, and capital flows in because now you're this pseudo institution because you've existed for. There's some sort of magic around the 6-7 year mark where people just believe that you're going to be around for a long time, and then a lot of good things can accrue to you around that mark.
One thing that I've learned is like a compounding graph is hard to notice unless you actually expand it out or zoom out, because when you zoom in, it always looks linear. And so it's interesting to you don't realize it's a compounding graph until you actually zoom it out. So we've noticed that.
Yep.
Cool.
Can I ask some more questions?
Yes.
All right. Let me pick some good ones here. What is one major lesson that you brought from Facebook as you were starting Statsig to shape it?
Yeah. The biggest thing I learned at Facebook is humility. Humility, because once you go in, you kind of like think that you know what to go build. There's a lot of product intuition you've learned over the course of years. But what I've also realized is products have gotten so much more complex. The abstractions that we now work on top of is like so much more richer. And it's impossible for like one person to fully understand the ramifications of new product features that you're building. And Facebook was like this personification of like collect data, instrument everything, and then learn from how people use the product. Don't assume what's going to happen. And that actually, in fact, data is like the biggest teacher of humility. And so I learned a lot of that. And so I learned to rely on data and not just on intuition. And it's kind of like what we talk about at Statsig, what we actually internalize pretty heavily at Statsig. So whenever we launch new features, it's always instrumented, always tested.
I'm shocked at Statsig that that's a cultural value.
Yeah, and so it's so much so that we believe so strongly that we actually went and built a company around it.
So you were at, what years were you at Facebook?
2011 to 21.
So 2011 was just post-IPO?
No, this was pre-IPO. We had about 500 million users worldwide.
And so this is a different company than we know of today.
Yeah.
You've told me before around that time it sort of still felt like a startup. What made a company of that scale successfully still feel startup-y?
Yeah, I think the company moved extremely fast, but precisely, and there's a lot of decision making that was distributed. And the reason why the company like that was able to distribute decisions to various small teams was the tooling that they had invested in was pretty robust, and the tools kept everything in place, the chaos from getting out of hand. And so one of the things that I realized was the tools shape culture, and the tools that enable people to like do certain things actually ended up shaping the culture that engineering had inside Facebook, which was like super fast moving, which kind of like felt like it's even though it's kind of like a larger startup, felt like a very nimble or early stage startup.
Hard to do.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to flip over to you. Now, you've studied extreme outliers in Acquired. You mentioned that. What is your biggest takeaway from studying all of these outliers?
People often talk about was it skill or was it luck? If you think about the distribution, so let's assume startup success is normally distributed, which I think is a reasonable. Most outcomes are sort of middling, and the more extreme you get, the fewer there are. And suddenly, when you get way out to the edge and look at a $3 trillion company, there's only one or two or three or four in the world, or at least in America. My biggest insight is that in order to be all the way at the edge of the distribution, it is the sum of all the skill and all the luck and all the timing and the product execution. You just need every single thing to break your way to become one of those. And so it was an inevitability that some company is going to become the most valuable company in the world. And if you just work backwards from, let's not even say, what did Google do right? What did Microsoft do right? So if you just say, well, if there's an abstract company that succeeded the most, it probably is the case that when you're multiplying a bunch of products together, they all sort of needed to be as close as 100% as possible. Or if you're summing them all, they're very large numbers. So I think not good for my business at Acquired, but there's actually very little to be learned from the most successful companies because none of our companies are likely to look like them. So we should try to figure out some sweet spot in the distribution where we feel like it would be an enormously successful outcome, but we don't need the luckiest break in the world, plus the best execution we could possibly offer, plus the best timing that we may not be able to nail. It's a funny thing studying the most successful and saying, how do I be like them?
So the advice for everyone here is like try and get everything that you can right.
Right.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
All right, my last question for you. What is your hottest take for Seattle's tech landscape in the next few years?
Yeah, okay, so Seattle is pretty unique, right? So we have lots and lots of cool innovation happening here. One of my biggest takes for, especially when we have a platform like AI that is emerging, is that it's going to take a little bit of time for people to like actually internalize this platform and then build some amazing applications that we're going to like, it's going to blow our minds. And I think that's going to come at the intersection of like various different domains, like AI combined with disease research, AI combined with biotech. And if you think about Seattle, we're uniquely positioned to bring all of those together. So I'm excited for some of those intersections to just blow out and blow our minds. What is your hottest take?
We are going to see some incredibly valuable companies that get to scale with still single-digit number of employees. I think this is like the coolest time ever to have a singular vision, because there are certain companies where you don't need a large team to execute it and create something really valuable. So I think we're going to see a handful of 5-person teams in Seattle that get to hundreds of millions of revenue, and I'm excited to see that.
I love that vision. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Gilbert, the one and only.